Hi there, welcome to Photoshop for Digital Production 2. In this class, by now, you should be pretty familiar with all the basics of Photoshop. So how to create files, how to maneuver around the program, and how to use all the most basic features of Photoshop. So we've had a look at most of the tools that a photo editor would normally use. In this class, we're going to take a look at the tools that graphic designers would use and then move on to the tools that most digital artists will use on a daily basis. The first chapter of this class is going to take a pretty deep look at all the different kind of vector-based tools in Photoshop. So we're going to look at shapes, path, layer styles, different text, and smart objects options. And then in the second chapter, we're going to take a look at different ways to smudge, different ways to shade using the different brushes that are available to us, and also creating new brushes to help us achieve whatever we need to. We're going to take a look at how gradient maps work and different layer modes. So there's a lot here to unpack. Let's get started. All right, so when it comes to using Photoshop, graphic designers will use a very particular set of tools, and most of them are going to be vectors. So they're not going to be rasterized images, they're going to be vectors. So just a quick recap before we begin as to what the difference is between a vector and a rasterized image or a raster. So raster image is going to be an image based on pixels. So it is going to be a set number of pixels for the image itself. A vector is going to be a mathematical path or a series of mathematical paths, and will rely on math and not really on the pixels that the canvas is made out of. So to give you a quick idea of the benefits of using vectors, of course, there's many drawbacks, but there are some obvious benefits, especially when it comes to graphic design. And this is going to be its lossless ability. So let's say we take the shape tool right here, and we have an option here at the top. We have the little drop-down menu, so you can select shape, path, or pixels. When you select pixels, and we'll try to find something that has a bunch of details in it to see if we can maintain it. So maybe this right here. So let's say we have this thing right there. As we can see here, it just displays the layer as it would normally. It's just a regular layer with a set number of pixels in it. And then if we change the scale of this, what Photoshop will have to do is it'll have to recalculate and try to scale it up as best as it can based on the existing pixels that are found there. And if it doesn't have enough pixels, then Photoshop will have to do its best to scale it up with what it has. But when it comes to time to using a vector instead, so a shape, instead of selecting pixels, we're going to go and select a shape. And we're going to trace the same thing at about the same size. So right about there. Now we can see the difference here. It's actually showing as a shape, and it has a little square here significating that we can actually edit this thing further. So the test here is going to be what happens if we scale both of these down and then scale them back up. You know, this could be something that we do often if we're trying new things and trying new designs. So let's try it with the pixel version. So I'm going to scale this down, Control T, and then scale it down quite a bit. So something like this. Then hit enter. I'm going to do the same thing now with a vectorized image. So when scaling things down, you really won't see a difference between raster and vectors, because it's just taking a lot of information and then shrinking it down into something that's smaller, that has less information. So in both cases, you'll get similar results, if not identical results. Now, what happens when we go the other way around? So when we take a little bit of information, that it's, in this case, the little amount of pixels that are left, and try to scale this up. And what happens when we take this shape here that is based on math and scale that up? So we're going to start with the pixel version, Control T, and we're going to bring this back to what it was before. And now, as you can see, everything is super blurry. It's blurry. We can kind of see the pixels. Photoshop tried its best, and it's not that bad, to be fair, but it really doesn't look that great. And now, just for the sake of it, we're going to try to do that again. So shrink it down again, hit enter. It's going to rasterize it again, and then back up. And now it's even more messed up, so even more blurry. So we're going to do the same thing now with this other image here. Scale it back up. And it is as crisp as it's ever been. So I could be doing this a million times with a vector. It would still give me the same result. And I could do this at any size and it would still give me the same result. With a raster here, not so much. So this is the obvious benefit of using vectors when it comes to graphic design. If it's something that you're going to print on a really, really big surface, for example, you want something that doesn't lose quality as you increase it in size. So for this reason, we are going to ditch the pixels for this first chapter. All right, and now before we actually get into the tools that we'll use, we need to set our Photoshop up a little bit better. So right now, if I look here at the different tabs that I have layers and channels. There's one more that I'll need to add, and it is going to go, so we're going to go window, and we're going to add path. So now we can see I actually have something in here already. So the path here is going to be the outside line, so the outline of the shape. So if I go to my pen tool here, we can see it's outlined in blue. As you can see here, all the blue lines, those are going to be all the path that make up this shape. So I will have, in this case, the lines only, which are going to be represented in the path tab, and I'll have the color that fills the shape in the regular layers tab. So that's one particular thing with vectors, is that you'll have the path in one tab and the actual color or the fill in the layers tab. And then what's great with this is that if you want to change the color, for example, all you can do is go with the fill here, and you can always change the color anytime you want. All right, so now that we have the basics out of the way, I can delete that. And so the first tool that we are going to take a look at, it's going to be the most important one. It's going to be the one that designers use the majority of the time that they spend in Photoshop or Illustrator. It's a tool that is found in most applications similar to Photoshop. So you'll have the same tool in Adobe Illustrator, for example. And that tool is going to be the pen tool. So it's going to be this little thing here, and this is a monster of a tool. So if you click on the little drop down menu here, so you press an Alt, you'll see a bunch of different tools here, different variants, kind of like the pen tool family. You can ignore all of them. So the first one is going to be the one that we use, and we'll be able to use all the other ones by just simply using hotkeys. And while we're at it, we'll also use a shortcut to select the pen tool. So we know by now that B, if we press B, it brings up the brush tool. If we press P, it'll select the pen tool. So always use P. From now on, don't go in here and don't waste time selecting this. Just press P. It's an easy to remember. It's the first letter of the word of the tool, so just use P from now on. So at its roots, the pen tool is very simple. So what it does is it creates a single line. So by default, you might not even have the fill option here. So I'm going to select it too. Actually the fill is going to remain whatever it is, but the pen tool by default might not have shape selected. So it might only have path. And you can see here, since the pen tool is a vector tool, we're not going to be able to select pixels. So pixels only for raster image, but vectors are none of that. So we'll be able to select shape or path. We'll start with path. Path, like I've mentioned before, is just the outlines. It'll be the line essentially that the pen draws. So if I tap here and I tap here, there we go. I have a path right now. And this is basically what the pen tool does. It creates path. Now, a path like this is not really interesting. It's a one-dimensional shape. It's not even a shape. It's a one-dimensional element. It doesn't have any thickness. The path is simply going to remain there and kind of be in the way. So why would you use a path? And why can't I delete this one right now? So like we remember the path are going to be managed by the path tab. So everything path related is going to be found here. This is where you would move it. This is where you would create new ones or delete them. So if I go ahead and delete this one, yes, now it'll be gone. Notice that whenever I draw something in here, it's not actually creating anything in my layers tab because this is a path only. Now, if I want to create something in the layers tab as well, what I can do is go to shape instead. And now if I draw a shape, now it'll show up in here and it'll show up in the path tab as well. So now you can see I have the work path here for the other shape that I created before and this one that I just created. But in this case, since the first one didn't have a fill, it's only showing up in this one tab. So I'm just going to get rid of these two. And now I'm going to show kind of like the basics of how this tool works. So with the pen tool selected, I'm going to just draw a simple path. So maybe something that is closed instead of a single line. So we can tap once, tap twice, tap 3 times. And then if we want to close the shape, all we have to do is hover over the first one and you'll see that the little icon, the little pen icon suddenly has a circle, a white circle next to it. This means that it closes the shape. And now the shape is closed. So what are the kind of hotkeys that we can use for this? There's 2 main ones. So of course, P to select the pen tool, and then we're going to use Control or Command in the case of a Mac, and we're also going to use the Alt key or the Option key for Mac users. So those are going to be the 2 main ones that we use and will allow us to use all the different features of the pen with just those hotkeys alone. So the first one is going to be the Control key. So when you press and hold Control, what it's going to allow you to do is modify anything that's already there. So let's say I press and hold the key. As you can see here, Control is selected. What I'll be able to do from now on, if I have the pen tool selected, now I'm able to modify the points that I have right now. And a little bit of vocabulary to go along with this. Those points here are called anchor points. They anchor the lines. The line itself is called the path. And then we'll have the option to bring up handles. So handles are these things right here, these little things on each side of the point or the anchor point. So these handles, as you can see here, they allow me to create curves. So if you only have points alone, you're not going to be able to create curves. All your lines are going to be straight. But if you use handles like this, then it allows to create some nice curves. So we'll obviously use this pretty extensively. And now, if we look back here, the kind of different things that we can do. So we can add anchor point or delete anchor points. So to add an anchor point, you actually don't need to use these tools here. What you can do, if you have the pen tool selected and you just hover over the line that exists here, if there's no points there, you'll see it switches to the little plus icon. And this means that you can just add an anchor point if you tap it. So if I tap here, then I have a new anchor point. And if I press and hold Control, I can move that anchor point wherever I want. And in the same way, I can just move the handles as well. So there's one more thing with the handles that you can do, and that's something that you can do with any kind of Photoshop tools, at least most of them, is pressing and holding Shift while you're doing an action. This is going to snap it to a certain degree. So for example, if I press Shift here, Control Shift onto these handles here, as you can see here, if I rotate, it snaps it by increments of 45 degrees. And it can also help me make straight lines, which is pretty useful. And now, in the same way that I added this anchor point by just clicking on it, if I just hover an existing point and then tap it, it's going to disappear. And for this to work, by the way, you need to have the auto add and delete option selected. So you can check this if it's not selected by default. Now, the last option that we have with this is the Alt key. So by pressing Alt or Option, if you're using a Mac, then this is going to bring up this little tool right here, which is the Convert Point tool. So the Convert Point tool, well, it converts anchor points into different things. So there's two main that these anchor points can have. So an anchor point can have no handles or it can have handles. So in this case, this one has handles, obviously, because I'm able to create this nice curve. But if I press Alt, and you'll see if I hover the little anchor point right now, it's giving me a different options, like a little broken line. And if I tap that, it'll get rid of the handles and return to being a straight line. And then if I tap it again, it's not going to do anything. I have to tap and drag. Click and drag with the Alt key or the Option key selected. And then like this, I'm able to bring it back and turn it into an anchor point with handles. And I can do this for all the other ones as well. Click and drag, and there we go. And then the same way, I can click again with Alt selected and it'll remove the handles. Now there's one more thing that I can do with this. As you can probably see here, if I tap on this particular anchor point here, there's two handles on both sides. Now if I decide to move that handle right here, as you can see here, it moves the other handle as well in the same kind of direction, or the opposite direction in this case. But what if I don't want that? What if I want to move this handle independently of the other one? Well, again, the convert point tool plays a role in here. So if I press Alt and at the same time click on the handle instead of the anchor point, well, now I can move that handle alone, so it's broken. I've broken the handle. And now all I have to do, if I want to, I can just move the handles independently now if I want. So now those handles are broken, and this way I can actually do anything I want. Those features and those options, those tools, that's the fundamental of the pen tool. With this knowledge, you can do almost anything. So we're gonna do a couple exercises here to see how this can be applied and how do you use this in real life. This first example here, what we'll want to do is create a circle using anchor points or using path. So I'm going to start here at the side. So I'm going to click and drag for the first one to make sure that I have anchor points. Next, click up here, click and drag. Next on the other side here, click and drag. And you can see here, as I drag, I can try to match the circle here that I'm trying to copy. Then click and drag here. And then click on the last one and close the circle. Now, if it's not perfect, well, we know that I can always go back and I can click Control. And now I have access to my handles and I can just move this around, try to match it as best as I can. Like this. Like this. All right, so that would be pretty good. If for some reason I didn't click and drag for one of them, so if I made a mistake and I have something like this, like a broken line, well, that just means that I need to convert this particular anchor point. This is an anchor point without any handles. So again, to bring back the handles, to convert that anchor point into one that has handles, well, all I have to do is hold Alt or the Option key and tap on it and drag. And then there we go. Now I would have my handles back. There we go. So now I would have a path. As you can see here, it's also shown on here. And this path would represent the circle that I was drawing it over. Now, let's say I made a mistake with this and I want actually to have color inside of this. I didn't want just the path because the path on itself is kind of pointless. So what you can do is you can just right click on the shape and it'll bring a menu with a number of things that you can do. And a lot of these things you'll probably be familiar with. So we can create vector mask. We can, of course, delete the path. That's pretty obvious what it does. We can make a selection out of this path. We can fill this path. And we can stroke the path. So stroke is going to be pretty cool. So we can select a brush, for example, and hit OK. And then what it'll do, it'll select the brush that I have selected right now, and it'll use it to go around and essentially draw draw this path as if I was drawing it, but it'll draw it for me without me having to do anything. So it's a really cool feature for a number of things that you can do. So if you want to create like a really like long and smooth curve, then you can definitely use this option. Now I'm gonna undo that and see what else we can do with this. So if we right click, well, we can free transform the path. Obviously we can transform that. We can also just hit Control T for this. And the other one that's really interesting, other than the fill path, which will add a color to it, which is kind of what we wanted to do. So we can select color here and this color and hit OK. And then there we go. And now suddenly I'll have the information, the color information in my layers tab, as well as the path in the path tab. Now, however, even though this path is filled with color, it's not a shape. So it's still just a path with color inside, but the color, the layer itself, this is a raster. So I can scale this up or down and maintain the pixel density that it currently has. It's just pixels. So if I wanted to be able to do what I did at the beginning of this class and be able to resize it and change the color easily, well, I would have to select a shape here when I create it instead of a path. And then lastly, the last one that's kind of important here is the make selection option. So this, if you have your path selected, you can make selection, and you have a number of options here. By default, it's normally good. And what it'll do is it'll select a path and make a selection for this. So again, if you have a really long, smooth curve that you want to select, instead of having to use either this tool right here, so either the lasso tool and making sure that you draw a really straight line, or instead of using this the one with the anchor points, which doesn't really create a soft curve, it creates a curve with like little facets that you can see. Instead, you could create a curve like this. So you could create a curve, a nice curve, something like this, then close it and make that into a selection. And now you would have a nice smooth selection based on a mathematical curve. All right, moving on. So I'm going to get rid of this and we're going to move on to the next exercise. So we're almost done here. We've looked at most of the tools. But I just want to increase the difficulty a little bit. So now what happens if we want to trace a heart like this and do so using a path? So I'm not going to use the shape yet. The shape is exactly the same, except it's going to be a path with a fill color. That's the only difference. So right now I want to still see the red. So I'm just going to use the path. I'm just going to focus on the outline because that's essentially what's the most important with this tool. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to press B if I don't have it selected yet, and I'm going to start tracing those lines. So the way I do it is I just kind of tap a couple, set a couple anchor points, and then I'll try to figure out how I can either add handles or tweak the handles that I have to be able to reproduce this shape. What's really important when drawing with the pen tool is to have as few anchor points as possible. You're a good designer if you don't use many anchor points. If you use too many, it just makes things really hard to edit and it doesn't give nice curves. It'll just make your life much harder. So to be efficient with this, you have to use as few as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and start with one right here, another one here maybe, another one here. So I'm starting with the bare minimum, and we'll see if I can actually manage something with this. If not, then I can add some more, but always start with as few as possible. So now I have no handles on either of them, so because I didn't click and drag when creating anchor points. So I'll start from the bottom here. So I'm going to click Alt, press Alt, and tap the little anchor point here and drag. And I'm going to click again and break those handles on both sides. So I'll be able to play with the curve a little bit more and have a little bit more freedom, a little bit more control. So on these on these sides here where I have a nice curve, I'll want to have the handles for both. So handle here, handle there. So I'm actually going to try to move this up a little bit, maybe right here, right here. And then for this one, again, I'm going to create handles and break them. So I just let go and click again. Let go, click Alt and break the handle. All right, and now I'll see if I can just adjust my handles to see if I can possibly get this shape exactly how I want it. All right, so that's pretty much it. There you go. With only 4 anchor points, you're able to create a heart like this. I have a nice heart with only 4 anchor points. So this is kind of the beauty of the pen tool. You can create some pretty complex shapes without much work at all. So the last exercise that we're going to do is this one right here. So we'll want to try to reproduce this thing here. So this one is seems a little bit more complicated, but it's still going to be fairly simple as you'll see soon enough. I know there's been a lot of content so far, a lot of different tools or different variants of the tools and different options that you can do, but it's one of those things that you just try using it and you'll see it becomes really, really simple. So I'll work on this thing right here, and then we'll look at a couple mistakes and how to fix them, and we will be done with the pen tool. So let's get started with this. So as usual, I'm going to create an anchor point. I'm just going to create a series of anchor points first, and then we'll try to figure things out from there. So in this case, whenever you have a broken line like this, this will for sure require at least 1 anchor point. So by looking at this thing here, I'll have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 anchor points. So I don't think I'll be able to get away from that. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on each of the corner of this shape, close it, and then we'll try to make those lines, those paths work. So in here, I am going to need a handle if I'm going to be able to create this curve right here. So I'm going to click Alt, click and drag, and then I'm going to let go, and then click Alt again, and then break this one right here to make it a straight line parallel to this one right here. And then this one on the other side, I'm going to click Control since it's already broken, and I am going to drag it out to try to follow this curve as best as I can. This one right here, again, I'll have to convert. So click the Alt and convert this single point to a point with handles. Then Alt again, click on the handle itself to break it. So something like this. So nice. So I have a nice curve right there. So I can click Control or Alt. In this case, the handle is already broken, so I can just click Control to modify what's already there. So I'll bring this in, and then I'm going to do the same thing with this one here. So Alt, click and drag, Alt, click and break the handle, and do the same thing on the other side. Just like that. And then the same thing here too. Click and drag, Alt, click, and I'll need, whenever you have a broken line and then followed by a curve, you will need to break your handle. So you'll know that you won't be able to use just a single anchor point without handles. So in this case, again, I'm going to break it. Break this one here to make it parallel to the other one, and this one here to get the shape of the curve. All right, something like that. So that's pretty close already. So there you go. It seemed pretty complicated, but it's actually really, really simple, and it's just a matter of getting the hang of it. So by doing this more and more, try the same exercises where you have a bunch of different shapes like this and you try to recreate them using the pen tool. Like I mentioned, the pen tool also have the other option here with the shape option. And the shape option is going to be exactly the same thing, except it'll already pre-fill your shape or your path. And then with this, it'll create a little box here in the layers tab. So you can double click on that and you'll always be able to go ahead and change your color interactively. Now, one last thing when it comes to shapes like this. So right now, this shape is a vector. So I can scale it down, I can scale it back up, and it'll never lose its sharpness, its crispness. It's still a vector because it's still being managed by a path. So the path still exists here. Now, what I could do with this is I could rasterize it. And then what you do with this is you can click on anything that would normally work on a rasterized image, so like a brush stroke. So you can click B to select the brush stroke or the brush tool and tap on the shape. And it will ask you, this shape layer must be rasterized before proceeding. Raster this shape. You can click OK. And if you do, in this case, well, this shape now is not going to be a vector anymore. So if you scale it down and scale it back up, it'll lose its quality. But at the same time, you still have the shape here. So the shape didn't go away. It's still there. So if you needed, for example, to create a new fill for this shape, well, you could. So if I wanted to, for example, I could just deform this thing here, deform the path that I have. And you'll see now what's really cool with this option is that now this shape here, which is based on pixels and which is rasterized, is still being managed by the path. And not really, but the mask here is being managed by the path. So if I go and change the path, so we can click Control, bring the pen tool, P, and then click Control to select the shape, and then move the anchor points. Well, I can move this thing here and then go back to my layer, and I'll still be able to paint on it, just like I'm able to paint on anything else. But I'll be bound to this shape right here. All right, so that's it for the pen tool. Now we're going to move on to layer styles. So we are already on a layer right here. So this is going to be something that you'll definitely use quite a bit if you're a graphic designer and if you play around with shapes. So layer styles essentially are this thing right here. So if you click the FX thing, all these options are going to be layer styles. So let's click one and see what happens. So if you click any of them, it's going to bring up the layer style box where you'll be able to tweak all the different settings and then even add some more layer styles or remove some. So you add some by clicking on the little checkbox right here. So we'll take a look at some of them. So bevel and emboss. This is a fun one. Essentially, it bevels your shape. So it makes it as if it's 3D, as if there's like a fake light source, and you can move the light source like this. You can also change how the highlights and the shadows are, what kind of blend mode they're using. So if you don't like screen, you could do overlay, for example. If you don't like multiply, you could do something else. And so you have a bunch of options here. The best way for you to get to know this is to try it and see what happens in real time. So all the options are very, very simple. It's pretty, self-explanatory. And those are probably not things that you'll use a whole lot, but they're there. Bevel and emboss, pretty cool. But the real ones that are going to be important are stroke. So stroke is as it sounds like. It creates a stroke around the shape or along the path, and you can create different size. So you can adjust the size to whatever you want. You can change the color to whatever you want, and you can also adjust the fill type. So let's say you want a gradient on the color. So you could have something like this. So maybe like the top of the line is a different color and the bottom is another one. So if we switch back to colors, now we'll just get back the flat color that we had. And then here again, you can have different blend modes, or you can have also the option to change different positions. So if it's outside of the shape, if it's inside of the shape, or if it's center. Next, we have something called inner shadow. This is going to create kind of a shadow on the inside of the shape, and you'll see it here a little bit better if I hide the stroke, or if I place the stroke on the outside. So inner shadow, I'm going to scale this up a little bit so that's a little bit more visible. But yeah, as you can see, it creates kind of like a nice shadow based on the shape that this is. So what's cool with this is I can hit OK, and now since it's a layer style, it's not applied to just this shape, it's applied to anything visible on this layer. So for example, if I go back to my path and change that to a different shape, well, the entire thing will retain those same properties. So whatever I drew on it as a raster, that's not going to change, but the layer style itself, as you can see here, the outline and the inside shadow, those are still going to remain regardless of the shape. So now I can go back and look at some more. So instead of inner shadow, I can also do inner glow, which, well, it does exactly what it sounds like. So I'll add a glow on the inside. I can change the type of the glow. So whenever there's an option to change a color or apply a color, you'll always have the blend mode here as well to be able to change how that color is being applied on it. Next, another one that's interesting is the color overlay. So it just applies a flat color on top of it. And of course, you have different options here. You have also gradient overlay, which will apply, well, a gradient. So in this case, I have a bunch of them, but you can create those yourself. You can apply patterns, you can apply an outer glow. So in this case, we're not going to see it much if it's an overlay mode, but if it's normal and I set it to like red, we see the shape would glow red on the outside. Or you can have a drop shadow. So if I change the distance so that's a little bit further away, as you can see here, you can also change the angle. It's just as if this shape is being lit and casting a shadow on the canvas. So those are all the different layer styles. Again, there's some more here that you can play around with. I'm going to hide this one. And so what do you do with layer styles? So once you're done, well, the beauty of layer styles is that it's non-destructive. So you can always go back and edit them. So even if you change something, so let's say I'm just drawing a normal thing, right? So if I'm not using shapes or anything like that, and I just want this thing here to have its own layer style. So what I can do is just add some. So I'm gonna go ahead and maybe add a drop shadow to this thing. So there we go. So now it has a shadow. Maybe the distance is a little bit shorter. Change the angle. Make the size a little bit bigger. There we go. And now if I want to draw some more, then that thing that I just did, the layer style is going to be applied to everything on this layer. So you can create some really cool stuff. And this is actually really, really powerful if you're doing stuff for video games, or if you're doing anything for anything graphic design or anything like UI design. The possibilities are endless. And even better, well, once you have those layer styles here, you can just hide them if you don't want to see them. You can hide them, you can delete them if you don't want, or you can copy them on other layers. So let's say I have the drop shadow here that I like. What I can do is you can right click on here and you can go and copy layer style and click on the other layer and paste layer style, and then you'll find that the same layer style is applied. So for example, if you have an environment and you're working on a video game and you want to add snow, but you don't want to have to paint the whole snow, paint the highlights, paint the shadows and all this stuff because that would take too long. Well, what you can do instead, you can use layer styles. So we're going to do a very simple, let's do a white. So I'm going to do a small mountain like this. So a wall of snow. And then maybe another one right here. All right, so let's say I have something like this and I don't want to draw the shadows for all of this stuff? Well, what I can do is I can pop a layer style. So I'm going to use a couple different ones and see what we can do with this. So we have a drop shadow now. I'm going to soften this a little bit, increase the distance, drop the opacity. So now I have kind of like a nice shadow for this thing. I'm going to change the angle of the light to be maybe something that's more top down. Next, I'm going to add in inner glow or inner shadow. Yeah, inner shadow is probably better. I'm going to drop the intensity, drop the size. So maybe something like that. And then another color, so maybe something more blue. All right, there we go. So now what I can do with this is I could duplicate this, maybe erase what I have right here, and paint some more to give kind of like a layering effect. And you can see how pretty awesome this is. So with this, you could be creating a lot of stuff, and you know, whatever you're drawing already has shading on it. So it really makes things faster if you use this in a smart way. All right, so now there's two more things that I want to cover when it comes to Photoshop for graphic design. And the first one is going to be text, and the second one is going to be smart objects. So text, very simple, and you've probably used it yourself. But with text, you can do a lot of the things that we did. It's more like with text mixed with layer style, it suddenly becomes something that's very powerful. So you can create a lot of really, really cool stuff with this. So text on its own, kind of boring. So we can bring up the different options here. So you can select a different font. So let's say select this one here. Hello. And then from there, you can change the size here. You can change the leading. You can change the lead. You can change a bunch of different things. So again, play around with these. Everything is well described. If you hover anything, it'll tell you what it does. And so text alone, like I said, not so interesting. There's a couple things that you can do with text though. So we can have different aligns. So that's pretty obvious. But you can also make it so that it has kind of like an arc to it, or a bulge, or you can do different things with the text. But what I like to use when it comes to text or improving a text is layer styles again. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to create a cool title, something like this. So maybe it's going to be just hello will probably work. Maybe like another word, as if we're working on a title for a video game or something, like something that you could stamp on top of your box, or that you could use to market your game. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pop a couple of layer style and see what we can do with this. So you'll see that very quickly those layer styles can really transform kind of like a mundane, kind of boring text into something that looks pretty epic. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to start with a little bit of a stroke and maybe some bevel. So we're going to change the depth of this. Give it a little bit of height. The stroke is going to be on the outside like it is right now, so that's good. And with the stroke, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a gradient. And of course, you can create your own. You can play around with this, change the colors. So maybe we'll create something like a metallic title, something like that. So this color here, this brown, is going to be a little bit darker. Maybe we can go yellow to match with the title. All right, something like this. Now already it's a little bit more interesting. And we can also add an overlay in the form of a gradient for the text as well. So there you go. That's a really simple example of the kind of stuff that you can do with this. And when you combine text and layer style, you can really create all sorts of awesome titles. And not only that, but as you can see here, if you actually create a title and then you apply a bunch of layer styles to it, and then you want to keep adding layer styles on top of that, then you can put that one layer inside of a group, and then you can apply new layer styles to that group, essentially multiplying the layer styles on top of each other and stacking them up to get something really, really cool. So if we hide this again, if we hide the effects, this is what we had initially, and then we just add a bunch of effects, and you can get something that looks significantly different. So there's really a lot of things that you can do with this. Now, the final feature that I want to explain, the final tool, is going to be smart objects. So smart objects, essentially what it is just it's a file, a project inside of a project. So this doesn't make any sense. Well, let me show you. So in this case, I'm going to bring this up a little bit. So I have this title here that I just created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this and group it into a single thing. So this one group here is going to be the title group. So I'm just going to rename it really quickly. And then what I'll do with this is I am going to convert to a smart object. So you can do that with anything. I'm going to convert this to a smart object. So now what it's done, it's considering that this entire layer here is also a project. So what I can do to enter the smart object, because right now, as you can see, all the options that I had are gone. So if I want to modify this, well, I can't really anymore. I can move it around and I can deform it, but I can't actually edit what's inside. So to do that, you just double click on this and you'll see the smart object by having this little, this particular icon. So if you double click on that, now I am seeing my smart object in its own file. So as you can see here, it's a completely different file, as if I had opened a new window or a new image. And now what I can do with this, and you'll see I have all my options here again, is whatever I do here is also going to be applied on the other one. So let's say I decide to add something to this rectangle. Maybe something behind. So if I had a line like this on the back, now nothing's changed, but if I save this, Control S, as you can see, it'll apply it onto the other project as well, the project parent to this one. So now you might be thinking, well, now why the hell would you want to do that? Well, what's really cool with this is that in this case, I'm seeing this exactly how I made it initially. And now if I go back here and distort this thing here, let's say I put it at an angle like this, maybe make it a little bit bigger and have a bunch of stuff in front of it. Well, now that I've done all these things, maybe I want to do some more. So maybe what I want to do with this is add maybe some green slug coming down the side of it. So like this. Alright, so I added this. Now I'm going to actually give this a layer style as well. So maybe a little bit of a drop shadow. Alright, so something like this. And give it a little bit of an inner shadow. Alright, so I have something like that now. And well, let's say I want to keep editing the stuff in the back and I'm not sure, maybe I want to use a different title. So what I could do is simply go back in here and start editing things. So with this, the beauty of smart objects is that everything is non-destructive. So let's say I have this here and I like this, but I'm not sure about the sign. So maybe I want to change the sign a little bit. Well, you can always go back in your smart object and then decide to change things. So let's say I don't want the E anymore, and maybe I want the the back thing here to be a different color. So maybe a little bit more of a maybe more green, maybe something like this. And I want to try to see what that looks like. Well, what I can do is just hit save, and then magically it'll also be applied onto my main image. And so you can imagine, with more and more things on top being affected by different, this little sign right here, this little title being affected by a number of other things, it becomes a little bit hard to see what we had initially. But with a smart object, you can always go back and see it on its own without any of the edits that you made otherwise. And again, it's non-destructive, so we can always edit things. And just when you're ready, you save, and then you'll see the effect applied onto your main image. So smart objects are really, really, really powerful tool. And yes, you can actually have a smart object inside of a smart object inside of a smart object. So it never ends. This link can go as long as you want, I think. Yeah, it just allows for a world of possibilities. So this is going to be it for this first chapter on Photoshop for graphic design. So we've taken a look at a number of tools that graphic designers will use on a daily basis that are really important and also really powerful, yet very easy to get into. So it's one of those things that, easy to learn, hard to master. So we've taken a look at the pen tool, including shapes and path. We've taken a look at different layer styles, at the text options mixed with layer styles, and smart objects. So all of these can work together to create some pretty awesome things. And it's only a matter of, your imagination as far as what you can create with this. And in many cases, without having to use your pen at all. So all of this can be done with a mouse pretty easily, and it doesn't require any kind of dexterity or anything like that. So that's going to be it for this chapter. Next chapter, we're going to take a look at all the different tools that digital artists would definitely want to know. This chapter on Photoshop for digital art is going to be focused on all the tools that digital artists will likely use on a daily basis. So those are all going to be tools for digital painting, more specifically. So digital painting requires just like in real life, requires a brush. And that brush, well, in Photoshop, it can be a lot of different things. And you can actually create your own. You can also select from a number of brushes that exist within Photoshop, or you can buy brushes from other people that other people made. So it's very similar to the real deal. And then also in this case, what we're going to do on top of using different brushes, well, we'll be using different tools or different ways to paint and to apply this virtual paint onto a canvas. So I'm going to try to give you a good overview of all the different different options that are available to you if you want to try painting digitally. So we're going to start really simple. We're going to start with a brush stroke. So we're going to select the brush, and in this case, again, I've mentioned this in the previous class, but what you see here might be a little bit different for you. If you want to make sure, you can always go back here and restore the default brushes. So this will give you back the Photoshop default. So let's say you deleted a bunch of them and you don't know where they went and you're freaking out. Well, you can always go back here and restore defaults. So this is what I'll do right now. What it's giving me right here are all the brushes, the default Photoshop brushes. So what I can do is I can select a really basic one. So I'm going to go ahead and select this one right here. And when looking at brushes here, what you can do and what I recommend, and by the way, also to bring up this little tab here, this little window, you just right click anywhere on the canvas with the brush select, and to select the brush, well, just select B. And then once you have this window here, if you don't see what I'm seeing right now, what you can do, and like I said, I highly recommend you do this, is select all these things here. So show the brush name, show the brush stroke, and the brush tip. And looking at the brush stroke right here, this will indicate you if there is pressure or not for this particular brush. So as you can see here, this one here is solid all the way. My pen pressure is not going to have any impact when using this brush, and I can demonstrate that. If I select a black color here, if I press very, very lightly, it's just going to be the same color regardless. So it has no pressure sensitivity. If I select this one here with the edges, the tips of the brush stroke kind of faded, then I'll be able to use the pressure from my pen to create a gradient and to apply more or less paint depending on how hard I press with my pen. Now all these different brushes here do something different. Some are going to be soft, some are going to be hard, some will have texture, like this. Some will try to mimic kind of like more traditional medium. Some will be very digital, like like things like this. So your Photoshop brushes, like your real brushes, if you were a painter, they're very customized to you. So some of you might like certain things, others might like other things. So it's very important to have a custom brush set. So a set of brushes that you use most of the time that you know very well. So of course you can use the Photoshop defaults. They're really, really good. So there's a lot of things here that you can do. You can do an entire painting with only one type of brush. So you really don't need a whole set of brushes. This is something that a lot of beginners will do, a mistake that a lot of beginners will do, and it is to download all the brushes. Everything they can find is just download it. And then what happens is you open your brush tab here, and you can scroll for days, if you want to look at all the brushes. And this makes it really hard to understand what each of them do, and it makes it even almost impossible to customize a certain number of brushes just for you, something that you're really comfortable in using. So my personal brush set is this, and that's it. It might look like a lot right now, but if you paint a lot, there's just going to be a certain amount of things that you need quick. So for example, this one here, MB birds. Well, it is what it sounds like. It's birds. It just creates birds. So it's a really quick way to add birds to your painting, and you can do the same thing with a number of different elements. So let's say you want to add, clouds. So in this case, my background is not a great color for clouds, but I'm going to add black clouds. You can see here, you can have a brush for clouds, or you can have another brush for plants if you want to draw a bunch of plants. So something like this, something more organic. So again, you can create almost anything with Photoshop. The brush creator for Photoshop is really, really powerful, and we're definitely going to take a look at this a little bit later. But right now, I am going to focus on the things that are more basic, that you really need to do with your brushes before you can actually go in and customize them a little bit further. So before we get to that level, we actually need to get a handle of on what we have so far. So I would highly recommend that you go ahead and select one of the default brushes. So one like this, so the hard round pressure. This one is going to be a really good one to start. So just make sure that you select this one here, hard round pressure opacity. Don't include the flow part. That's not going to be necessary. And when painting with this, make sure that you have the same settings as what I have right here. So don't select any of these, and don't change the flow, and don't change the opacity. So leave that at 100%. So in the last class, we've taken a look at how opacity works, and we should be able to have a better control of our pen already. So now we're going to move on to something that's a little bit more tricky, or not tricky, but different options that you can do other than using a regular brush. So I'm going to use the brush for now just to draw something here, and then I'll introduce a new feature, a new tool that you might use quite a bit. And so we're going to go to the smudge tool right here. So the smudge tool doesn't work that well with the Photoshop default. So let's say I use the same brush, a similar brush, and then I try smoothing this thing here. What it's going to do is just, it'll try to mix the colors together. But the brush that I'm using already, you can see it's moving a circle similar to my brush when I try to smudge things around. And it gets really laggy also. So what's best with this is to use custom brushes. So I have one here that I will include, and it's really good for smudging. So it is this one here, and it doesn't have a brush stroke. So it is the smudge tool. So the MB smudge brush. And this will create some really cool, some really nice soft mixing of the paint. So let's say you have, maybe you're trying to add shading to a sphere, and you can see your brush strokes like this, and you're like, this doesn't look good. How can I get a smooth, soft gradient? Well, you can definitely do that with the smudge tool. So all you can do is go like this, and now suddenly you have a nice, soft, smooth gradient from dark to light. And you can't see the brush strokes anymore, at least not so much. So smudge is going to be one of the most important things that you can use. So there's going to be two things essentially. It's going to be smudge, and there's going to be just pen control, which is my favorite, which is the one that you should practice the most because it will help you the most in the long run. So yeah, we can try to do this right now. So the exercise I always recommend you try doing is try to have this shape here fade out as smoothly as possible without using the smudge tool. So if we use the smudge tool, as you can see, all I can do is click and drag, click and drag, click and drag a couple of times like this, and I'll get a really nice gradient from light to dark. But how do you achieve the same, something like this, without using smudge? Well, it's pen control. So with everything selected at 100%, like I said, and we can use the hard round pressure opacity brush here from the Photoshop default, what you'll want to do is press really hard here, and as you move to the right, start to press lighter and 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 lighter. Of course, the first time around, you'll probably get all these circles here, and that's fine. Then you just go back, and what you can do to smooth this thing out, because right now it doesn't look that great, it looks kind of messy, but what you can do is, remember, we started from the same color, so we started from this gray here. So instead of using that gray, now you can color pick, so press Alt or Option, and color pick a color that's not as dark as this one. So maybe this one right here, and then go over this region again. And then you can do that over and over again. So maybe even select the new color in between, and then brush, brush, brush. And then a new color in between again, and then brush, brush, brush. New color in between, brush, 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 brush. So by always selecting a color that's slightly lighter, or a color that's kind of like the halfway between the two colors that you're trying to blend together, you can create some really nice smooth gradients this way. And sometimes, you know, this, even seeing the brush strokes like this might be more desirable to seeing something like this. So even though you can see the brush strokes here, it's smooth enough, but it also looks a little bit painterly, which is a nice quality to have in some cases. So this is how I create my gradients. You don't just take a really dark color or a color and then try to create a gradient in one shot, because it's going to be hard, especially if you're not used to your brushes, or if you're using a brush that's a little bit harder to use. Like this one, the Photoshop default is not that great for that particular exercise. But you can get around this by doing exactly what I just mentioned. So you go first from dark to light as best as you can, even if it doesn't look that great. And then from there, what you want to do is you want to break that harsh separation here between dark and gray. And so you can select the gray, paint lightly on it. Oh, and then look at that. It gives us a new color in between. So we can use that new color. Now color pick that and then blend the edges again on both sides. Oh, you can do that again. Oh, again. And then the more and the more you do this, the more you'll get a nice gradients just like that. So smudge or color pick and paint, color pick and paint, color pick and paint. Two main options when it comes to time to shade. Of course, there's a third one, but it's kind of the same one as this one here. So you can take, instead of a hard brush or a brush with hard edges like this one, you can go and select maybe this one here, soft round pressure opacity. So in this case, the brush itself is going to be it's going to have a softer edge to it. So that gradient here is going to be a little bit easier to recreate. So we can just press lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter as you go. As you can see, it's going to be a lot faster to get something closer to what we did initially with the smudge tool, the smudge brush. So yeah, sometimes this might be more desirable if you want something that's a little bit cleaner, a little bit more even. Some of the times you'll want the texture that the brush provides you. So this is definitely the way to do this. So now that we know how to create a nice smooth transition from one color to another, in this case from black to white or dark gray to white, we're going to do it once more, but with two colors. So let's say we have a color right here. Let's say we'll have this blue color, and we want to create a gradient to this red or dark orange color. So we're going to do the same thing. So we start this way, and we start heavy, pressing hard on it. And then as we move towards the right, we're going to press lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter until we reach the other side with almost no color. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So press hard, hard, and then lighter and lighter and lighter as you get towards to the left. And also we have a gradient that's not so bad right now, but then we can do exactly the same thing. So we pick a color that's in between and brush again. Pick a color that's in between and a couple more brush strokes. Pick a color that's in between, brush stroke, in between, paint. Color pick, paint. Color pick, paint. Color pick, paint. And there we go. Just like that, we can get some really nice and quick gradients. So this thing right here, this is going to be what you use all the time when painting. This is something that you really need to be able to do. So practice this a lot. If you can't do it, as cleanly as this, or at least something close to that. Because right now we're going to move on to shading. So shading in Photoshop is very similar to what we just did, except it's going to be on an actual real shape. So let's take some random shapes. So we know that those shapes here exist, so we're going to go ahead and select the ellipse tool. And we're just going to draw a black or dark gray circle. Any shape in particular, but what we want to do though is when we select this is select the pixels. All right, so we're going to draw in pixels, and we're going to pop a new layer before we do that, so that this circle is on its own layer, so that we can move it around. And more importantly, lock it. So that's what we're going to do first. So you lock this shape here. And I'll show you two different ways to create a shading for this, to turn these flat surfaces into more spherical volumes, so kind of like balls. So in the first case here, what I'll do is the simplest solution. So I'll go ahead and select a soft round brush. And all I'll do is we're going to make that thing maybe like a light blue at the top here. And so all you have to do, let's say you want to shade this, is you start with a soft brush, and in the center here, you press lightly. And then we have a nice sphere. All right, so that was super easy. Next, what you can do is you can do it with the other brush, so the hard brush. And we're going to start in a similar way. So we start from the center here, and we're going to paint, we start from the center here, and we're going to go around and circle, pressing as lightly as we can. And then as we get closer to the top here, we can start pressing a little bit harder, and harder, and harder, and harder, until we get our brightest color for this. So as you can see now, you can definitely notice all the brush strokes, so it doesn't look that great, especially if that's not kind of like the style that you wanted. But we know how to blend now, so what we can do is we can just select the halfway colors. So select the colors in between that were created and use those to paint. Use the new blues that we created. So again, color pick, paint. Color pick, paint. Color pick, paint. And when I'm painting, I'm pressing very, very, very lightly to make those brush strokes disappear as much as possible. And what we'll be left with is a really nice surface with a little bit of texture. So it looks more like just like a textured sphere. So it has a really nice look to it. It doesn't look as perfect. So especially if you're not drawing something that's robotic, or something that's if you want your things to not look as digital, this is the way to do it. All right, and then from there, if you wanted something smooth or if you want portions of that to be smooth, well, now that you can use the smudge tool, and the smudge tool will be great to soften all these things here. So you can just click and smooth. Click and smudge, and there we go. We have something that's almost identical. So this is the basics for shading in Photoshop. This is what you'll do in almost all scenarios. And of course, the more complicated the things that you're shading, the harder this will become. But this is the basics, the base for it all. So now we're going to move on to custom brushes. So custom brushes are brushes that you customize for yourself. So let's say you need something and you don't want to have to, let's say, like the example that I showed, let's say you want to be drawing birds every time. So you're working on environments and things like that, and you want to add birds, or let's say you want to add dust, or maybe you want to add like blood spatter or trees, or you want to add a fence, and you don't want to have to draw every single pole. Well, you can use a brush for that, a custom brush. So Photoshop's brush creator is awesome. It's very powerful also. So what we are going to do now is I'm going to show you how to create a really, really simple custom brush. So first things first, how do you create a custom brush? So the first thing we want to do is to have a canvas that's a good size for a brush. So what I found is a good size is about 1,000 pixel by 1,000 pixel. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create a new file that's going to be 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixel. Hit OK. So now here we have the new project. What we're going to do now is something super simple. So To create brushes, it's best to use black and white, where the black is going to be what the brush represents and the white is going to be the transparency. So we're going to select a black color right here, and I am going to draw a line, so, or maybe 3 lines. So like this, like this, like that. That's going to be my brush. So once you have this, and once you've drawn something, what you want to do to turn this into a brush is you go to Edit, and then you'll go all the way down to Define Brush Preset. So you want to click that. Now it'll tell you, and it'll actually show you a screenshot or a thumbnail of your new brush, and it'll ask you to name it. So I'll name it MB3. Click OK, and just like that, now you have a new custom brush. How easy was that? Now this brush kind of sucks. It doesn't have any pressure sensitivity. It doesn't have any. It's just not that great. It doesn't rotate if I tilt the pen. So now there are a couple things that we can do about this. So this brush still exists. You know, it's the new brush right here. It's been saved. So now I know that I have this one. But what if I want to customize this a little bit further, make it a little bit cooler? Well, we can go and open the brush panel. So the brush settings panel, I mean. And if you don't have that here, you can always bring it up by pressing F5, as you can see here. So you press F5, this will bring up this same panel right there. Now, there's a number of options in here, and most of them we will never use or very rarely. So I'm not going to show you all of them because they're just kind of irrelevant. So the ones that you need to know, however, the first thing that you should do when you create a new brush is to add pressure sensitivity and add also potentially a size change depending on your pressure. So if you press it lightly, you will have smaller brush stroke, and the harder that you press, the bigger your brush stroke will get. So those are the 2 ones I really like to do initially. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go in Shape Dynamics and make sure that this is checked. And with Shape Dynamic, we're going to change the size jitter here. So we're going to control, right now it's controlled to off. So we're going to set it to pen pressure. So already here you can see the thumbnail of the brush. This is going to give you an indication of what your brush stroke is going to look like from now on. So as you can see here now, if I press very, very lightly, it's going to go down to a single point almost. And I can test that. And there we go. So now it changes, the size changes based on the pressure that I apply. Now maybe I don't want it to go all the way to a single point. Maybe I want this to be at a minimum, as you can see here, a minimum diameter of like 50%. So at minimum, it'll be just 50% of its size. So I get some variation, but not too much. That looks a little bit better. Now, from this one here, you can also adjust the angle of the brush. So right now, I have kind of a direction like this. You know, it's kind of nice that I'm able to draw 3 strokes from this angle. But if I try to draw a horizontal brush stroke, well, I lose all of that. So what I can do now is I can set it to direction. And this way the brush kind of follows the direction and rotates as I'm rotating. Now obviously the direction now is wrong because it's using it sideways. So what I want to do is go to brush tip shape, and I can change this. So for the spacing here, what I recommend is anywhere between 15% and 5%. Anything lower than that is going to be just too demanding for your computer. And what it does basically is just the percentage, the space between each of the shape that it's repeating. So at 5, you get a really, really smooth curve. At 1%, it's super smooth, but there won't be much of a difference between 1% and 5%, except that it's going to drain a lot of power. So it's going to drain a lot of resources to be able to draw all those shapes really, really quickly. So 5% all the way to 15. 15 is pretty good. It's a little bit far apart, but it works really well and it's really fast. So what we want to do to fix this rotation problem, well, we can try to rotate the brush a little bit. So what if you do this? Now suddenly it'll work. So I just rotated the main, the initial angle for the brush, and now it actually works out a lot better. So now it's using the direction and drawing those 3 stripes regardless of the angle that I use. So that's a lot better. But as you can see here, we still don't have any opacity change. So that's definitely something that I want. And for that, we are going to go to transfer here, the transfer option. So by just selecting that, as you can see here now, it enables the opacity change based on the pen pressure. So now if I don't press too hard, I don't get a big line, or I don't like a thick line, I don't get an opaque line. And the harder I press, the more opaque it becomes. So that's a lot cooler already. And those will be kind of the main options that I use. So with this, you can create a lot of different really cool brushes. With this, you could create my favorite brush, the square brush. And it's as simple as this. So there really is not much to it. It's just, once you know how to create a simple basic brush like this, now what can you do? What else can you do? So there's a lot of different options that you have. So of course, all this stuff, there's some here that really don't make much of a difference. So noise, wet edge, build up, smoothing, protect textures, those last 5 here, pretty useless. So you'll likely never use any of these anyways. You'll lose all the ones, you'll use all the ones above that. So the brush pose one, also kind of useless. Transfer, we just took a look at it, so very interesting. The color dynamics, also you can also have it so that it changes the colors that you're using a little bit. So you can have it, right now it's at 2%, 2%, so let's try that. So as you can see here, when I'm in the dark, it's not pure black. As you can see here, it changes the color a little bit. So if you want to paint like grass or leaves or things like that, this might be a really cool setting to use, because it doesn't create just a black stroke. It'll vary the color or the opacity or anything that you set here. Next, you have dual brush. This is where it becomes really funky. So it essentially mixes 2 brushes together. So we can try different things here. And again, you'll see kind of the thumbnail down here. So you'll be able to tell what it's going to do. This is where you get some really interesting results. As you can see here. Whoa. But again, using this option here is a little bit more demanding when you have 2 brushes working for a single brush stroke. But with this, dual brush you can really get some interesting things here. So highly recommend you test this out. It's a little bit random, so it's hard to predict. But once you get the hang of it, you can create some pretty magical things. Now this one, the texture, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. So you select that, and then you can load up a texture right here, or import one if you don't see one that you like in here. And well, the result can be something like this. So as you can see here, I'm essentially painting a texture, and as I'm painting it, it's revealing the texture. So you can get some really cool results depending on the kind of texture that you have. I have other ones here that have a texture of a kind of like a canvas. Well, not this one. And like this. So this kind of texture, also really cool. So yeah, with texture you can definitely do a lot of things, and it gets really interesting when you start adding textures to the mix. And then the last one that's worth mentioning is the scattering. So scattering, the more you have it, as you can see here, if you look at the thumbnail, it'll scatter the brush prints essentially when you draw a straight line. So instead of having it all be on the same line, it'll scatter. So let's say you're drawing, you want to add a bunch of sand to something, or like dust particles. Well, in this case, you'll probably want to have a really heavy scatter, so you're able to create a lot of different particles, something like this. So this covers it pretty much for the brush creation process. As you can see, there's a lot more options in here, but it's all a matter of you going here and trying different things. This is how you really get good at creating new brushes. So you have to try it. Now, what do you do once you have a brush that you're happy with? Kind of like the one that we had before. So now we lost everything. Since I selected a new brush, this brush here, is back to its default, its boring default. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to fix that real quick. So I'm going to rotate that, this, shape dynamic, make sure that the size is ruled by the pen pressure and that the minimum diameter is 50%. Next, we're going to go to transfer and color dynamics, because that was kind of cool. And of course, I forgot the shape dynamic, that I want the angle to be managed by the direction of the brush. There we go. So now we have what we had before back. Now I want to make sure that I save this. So how do you save a new brush preset? So if I like this right there, I can right click on the little gear icon here and select new brush preset. Now it's going to ask me to name it, and you can include different things here. So you can include the brush size. So whenever you select this brush, it's always going to be the size that it is right now. In this case, 90. I don't like this, so I'd rather not select this. And I don't want to include the color either, because that can be a little bit annoying. But if you have a brush that's just for skin, for example, well, you might want to include the color. So every time you select it, it'll select kind of like the skin color that you like. But I've never used this, never used that. So just, rename it to whatever you want. Let's say new. And then as you can see here, we're going to have the new brush right there that we just created. And since the old one kind of ugly and we don't really need it anymore, we can just get rid of it. Delete. There we go. So now we have a new brush to play around with. All right, so there's two more things that I want to take a look at. So the first one is going to be gradient maps. So what are gradient maps? Gradient maps are basically a way to replace the values that you already have and assign a new color to different values in your piece. So let's say in here, we take a look at this one here. I have a range of values in here, and by values I mean from dark to light. So those are going to be values. Dark values are going to be closer to black, and then light values are going to be closer to white. So the range of values is all the different shades of gray that you have in your painting. In this case, I have pretty much a full scale. So I have something that's really, really close to pure black and something that's really close to pure white. Actually, I think I have pure white in here and pure black. So I have the full range of values in this particular painting. So what is a gradient map and how do you use it? So if I know that a gradient map is something that's going to replace all the colors in here, all the values, and replace them with another color, well, let's try to see what we can find here. So to apply a new gradient map, what you have to do is you have to click on the little ball here. So click on that and then create a gradient map. So we're going to click on that. So now it doesn't look too good. And if you do that, you'll probably have different results depending on what you have selected or the kind of gradients that you have saved. So to fix that, well, what you can do is you can double click on that if you don't have it selected yet, or just don't double click, but just click once, and it'll show you here in the properties the gradient map that is currently being applied. So what you can do is click on that and it'll bring up the gradient editor. So in here, you should have a number of gradients to select from. Those are mine. I think you'll have different ones. You'll have the Photoshop default. Doesn't really matter. So you can click on any of them and see what it does. And it should replace all the colors in the painting with the colors on this scale right here. So this is going to be the gradient. And what's going to happen is that it's going to assign any of these colors found on this scale here to the associated value in the painting. So in this case here, all the way to the right, this is going to be the white color. So the white color in my painting right now is going to be changed to this particular color. The black color in my painting now is going to be changed to red instead. So everything that's close to black is going to be changed to red, and then it'll go to the kind of like the dark grays. The dark grays will be replaced by this here, and then the mid grays will be replaced by this color right here, and then the the light grays are going to be replaced by this color instead. So again, it's assigning the value a color. So it doesn't really matter what what color you had in here. So I'll do the example. So let's say I have half of this that is going to be already black and white. So I'm going to go ahead and click Control U and reduce the saturation to nothing. And now what I'm going to do is create a gradient. So you can add a gradient map this way, and it's going to create a gradient that affects everything underneath. Or you can also go in here and adjustment and click gradient map. And in this case, it'll just do it on the filter on the layer that's active. So what you can do here is click on that. So now we're going to play with the gradients. And as you can see here, my image was split in half, but there's still, the gradient is still being applied the same way, or at least very similar way, because it's interpreting the grayscale in a slightly different way. But as you can see here, the black and white version or the colored version, still the gradient is being applied in a very, very similar way. So it really doesn't matter. The colors that you have in your scene or in your painting don't matter. What matters is the values that you have. So yeah, so what's really cool with gradient maps is that, let's say, right now it doesn't really make much sense because I'm starting from a painting that has colors and I'm applying a gradient map on top of it. So the gradient map is just going to make everything kind of the same color. Not the same color, but everything in the image is going to use the same gradient. So that doesn't work that well. But if I start with a painting in black and white and then want to add color, then using gradient maps is an awesome idea. So let's say, for example, that this entire painting here had no color from the beginning. So it was like that. And I want to add colors, but I don't want to have to paint in the color and play with different layer types and layer, bunch of layer modes and blend modes. So instead, I just want to get a quick feel for what this would look like with color. So what I can do is use gradient maps. Gradient maps are perfect for that. So let's say I just select the skin. So I'm going to select the skin really, really quickly. For the sake of this example, I'm not going to spend too much time on my selections, but something like this, just making sure that I get most of the face in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a gradient and try to get a quick skin color slapped onto this painting. So in here, what I can do is apply a gradient map to this selection. So with this selection made, all I can do is click on here and click on gradient map. So right now, not that interesting, it's all white. But if we click on here again and browse the different ones that we have, in this case, like I said, you probably don't have one that will do anything similar to this, but you can create it. So I'm just going to start one from scratch. So let's say we have a one that's just complete white right now. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I always recommend is you start from a dark color to the left and a light color to the right. So right now I have something that looks kind of what it was before. And now I'm going to add a little bit of color to this. I'm going to select the middle value here and select a color that has a middle value, so mid value, so something in the center here. So I don't want something that's too dark because it's going to look weird, or too white because it's going to look weird as well. But something that's right in the middle here, since it's right in the center of the scale. And so maybe something like this. All right, so already it's starting to have a little bit of color. It still looks kind of plasticky and kind of dead because we're using pure black and pure white. So we're going to try to change that. So instead of pure black, I'm going to go and select a color that's a little bit lighter and more saturated. So something more like a red instead, dark red. And we're going to do the same thing for the light here. I'm going to select something that's a little bit darker and maybe a little bit more blue. Something like that. All right. And then, so what Photoshop does with this is that by me having selecting 3 colors and no more, well, it's going to do its own thing to fill in the gaps. And what happens when Photoshop does that, it's never that great. So it'll kind of like muddy the color. And as you can see here, the gradient is not that interesting. So the best to do when you're working with gradients is to at least try to have 4 or 5 colors that you picked yourself. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select 2 more right in between each of these. So of course now this doesn't look that great, but I'm going to go select a darker color. Maybe something like this. So that looks pretty good. And then this mid gray or this light gray. Again, I'm going to try to select it and make sure that's saturated enough. It doesn't look dead. And with this, it's a lot of trial and error. So you're just, trying different colors, seeing what works well, making sure that you get a nice gradient from light to dark. So that's starting to look pretty good. So now I'm realizing that my light color doesn't work quite well. The highlight's too sharp. All right, so there we go. And now I can, if I really like this, by the way, I can just save it. So you can go ahead and click new. And then as you can see here, it added it to my presets. And just like that, I can click OK. And now I have a color assigned to these values here. And then you can do the same thing for the rest of the painting. And this is the beauty of gradients. It really allows you to quickly get in colors in your painting without much effort. Now, this is not the end for this. We definitely want to add some things after this, but as a first step, as a kind of like first go to color step, it really does an awesome job. And now the last thing that I wanted to talk about is layer modes. So layer modes will also be used to color. It's going to be used for a number of things, but to color different part of your drawings, especially if you're starting from black and white, layer modes are going to be really good at that. Not as good as gradient maps, but still pretty good. And they also have a number of other uses. So what is a layer mode? Layer mode is if you create a new layer right here, it's going to be this right here. So it's going to be essentially the blend mode for your layer. So we've taken a look at this previously a little bit. It's going to be exactly the same thing as changing the blend mode for your brush through this drop down menu here. So you have all the different options. So layer modes, the way I would normally use them is if you want to add like highlights or shadows, or if you want to add like a different light source in your scene, or if you want to add like some sort of reflection or subtle corrections. Layer modes are awesome for that. So let's say I want to add a little bit of sun in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and select a soft round brush maybe. So now if I just paint on here, well, it's not going to be that interesting. But now if we adjust the blend mode for this layer, so if we tweak the layer mode, now if I paint, oh, now suddenly I'm like painting light. So that's a lot more interesting. And then if I change the color maybe a little bit to something like this, now I'm painting a different color. So that's a lot better already. It's certainly a lot better than the normal blend mode for the layer, which is this one. So that could work, if you want to add dust, if you want to add a fog or something like that. But in this case, probably better to use a different one. But this is what layer modes are all about. So you have a bunch of different options, and you can add as many as you want. So let's say you want to have a different highlight here at the bottom, or maybe you want to add another layer with another type of blend mode to it. So maybe a multiply, when you want to add a little bit more of a blue, like a blue shadow at the bottom, something like that. Of course, you can erase. Those are just layers. Those are just pixels on the layer. So if you don't like something, you can erase it, just like that. You can make things glow, like her eyes. Just select something like an overlay blend mode. There you go. Now she's got glowy eyes. Super simple. Another cool trick that you can do with this is, let's say you want to add some shadows to her face. Let's say like she's being blocked by, I don't know, like somebody's in front of her and casting a shadow on her. So you can go ahead and select maybe like a blue color, and a multiply blend mode for that layer. Then there you go. So you can draw kind of like the shadow on top. So, you know, something like this maybe. And you can erase a little bit if it's too much. So there you go. A super easy way to add shadow. It's just a layer with a layer mode, a blend mode. All right, so as far as the tools that you should know and that you should be able to use, those are it really. So there's not going to be much more than you'll ever use. As far as I'm concerned, this is all I use. So this should give you a really, really good overview of all the possibilities that are available with Photoshop, all the different tools, and all the different things that you can do with it. So this is going to conclude this second class on Photoshop for digital production. So with this class over, you should have a really, really good understanding of Photoshop by now, of all its features, of all the different tools that the majority of artists will use, and really be able to create almost anything that you like at this point. So from now on, it's just a matter of trying things, of exploring, of developing further the skills that you already have, and getting better and better pen control. Knowing and learning the tools is the first step. From now on, I'll see you next time.